Firstly, before I make any statements, I want to clarify that I personally think that both the Arabs and the Jews have a right to live in Israel/Palestine. I oppose Hamas as well as many actions of the Israeli government, such as the active colonization of the West Bank through the settlements and war crimes such as the use of white phosphorus in populated areas. This conflict between Israel and the Arab world, more specifically Palestine, has been raging on ever since the end of the Second World War and the beginning of the Cold War. During this long period, the conflict has gone through multiple iterations, you could say, from straight up war in the earlier years to more of a terror war where front lines and combatants are vague, and determining who is in the right and who is in the wrong is complicated at best. But in the last 20 years, the main front ever since Israel ended the occupation of Gaza has been between the Hamas-controlled Gaza Strip and the Israeli government. Hamas was able to win a majority in the 2006 Palestine legislative election. This resulted in backlash from the opposing political party Fatwa. This ended up resulting in a brief civil war, which ended in Hamas taking over Gaza, which resulted in Hamas takeover of Gaza. This further led to Israel and Egypt strengthening the blockade to secure the borders. Israel has withheld Palestinian tax revenue. Important to note is that Israel is still supplying Gaza with humanitarian aid. Some have claimed following a WikiLeaks leak that operations like this have only been done to stop the Gazan economy from completely collapsing, but still keeping it on the verge of collapse to keep Gaza weak. Hamas, following its takeover of Gaza, has begun to crack down on political opponents, brutally punishing journalists and those who oppose the rules, destroying any semblance of free speech which might have existed beforehand. But most importantly, it has begun to transform Gaza into a staging ground for attacks against Israel. Gaza has reportedly spent a fifth of their annual budget on bolstering its rocket arsenal and digging so-called terror tunnels under the Israel-Gaza border, ending up in Israeli houses where they brutally slaughter the inhabitants. And all of this during times of economic hardship. Any protests against the economic policy of the Hamas government have been brutally suppressed. To instill fear in the Israelis and legitimize their own rule, Hamas has, in the last years, begun to heavily bombard or try to Israel. As Israel has been able to develop the Iron Dome, which catches around 90% of the missiles that attack Israel. But a good part of the missiles launched by Hamas don't even reach Israel. Around 30% of these missiles fired at Israeli land in Gaza, leading to even more chaos. This leads to a 4 times higher chance of missiles hitting Gaza than Israel. In addition, Hamas has been accused of stationing their missile launch sites in schools, hospitals, and populated areas, using their own people as meat shields. Israel, of course, then to protect their own citizens, retaliates by bombing these targets. Notably, Israel, in comparison to many other nations, try to at least warn the inhabitants of these areas through both roof knocking, a practice where unarmored bombs are first dropped to warn the civilians. Then they also use text to warn them. Well, what you can at the end take away from this is that both sides are evil to an extent, but Hamas has been both brutal to its civilian population and to the Israeli government and its people, while Israel is by no means an angelic state where everything is good, where nothing bad happens and they don't do anything bad. Hamas is, in my opinion, still worse.